This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
And we're live. Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week, we've got Rick Bate, Head of Formula E's Safety for the FIA. Rick, if you just want to come in and introduce yourself.
Well, you've partly done it for me, haven't you? So yeah, my name's Rick. I'm currently Head of Safety at the FIA Formula E Championship. I've been here for 4 seasons. Hand on heart, I didn't think I'd survive one, but 4 years on, I'm still here. Still finding it a challenge, still loving it.
So I don't know if you've seen the podcast, Rick. We like to just go right back to the start, where you grew up. Tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I grew up in, although you probably won't hear it in my accent, I grew up in deepest, darkest North Wales, in above a town called Llangollen. And the reason I say Llangollen is that I grew up halfway between Wrexham and Llangollen. And most people in my area would choose to say that they grew up in Llangollen rather than Wrexham. Nothing wrong with Wrexham, but back in those days, it was an interesting town to live in. Yeah, I grew up typical, Welsh family, farming, mining, steelworking, everything that you'd recognise that's typically cliched and Welsh. That was my family. I've got 2 older sisters who are so much older than me, I didn't even know them. They kind of moved on both into the RAF by the time I could even start to remember anything. But it was an absolutely fantastic place to grow up. And I did what most kids at my age did. I avoided getting in trouble by either riding dirt bikes, and then I got into rallying, very, very young. So I kept myself out of trouble generally with petrol. That sounds wrong, but I mean a petrol engine. Yeah, there was nothing else involving petrol, I promise. No, so I've been passionate about motorsport literally since I was a kid. My dad, my uncles were equally crazy about cars, and yeah, it's rubbed off on me, and I've now found myself in the perfect job.
Brilliant, Rick. Thank you. So can you tell us a bit about your first job, kind of leaving school or leaving university, whatever your path was?
So, I kind of knew you were going to ask me about this, and this, it's not really simple. I did my A-levels. I really enjoyed A-levels. I didn't really enjoy secondary school. The O-levels I found a bit, I just didn't find my place in the secondary school I was in. However, I went to a sixth form college, and yeah, do you know what? I started to enjoy studying. I could see where I was going, and I was lucky. I had several options. I actually won one of the old-fashioned Marks and Spencer's the managerial apprenticeships. That was in 81. I also tentatively got a place in the Royal College of Furniture, and a place in Loughborough to teach. And none of it happened because I managed to wrap myself around a lamppost on a motorbike. And so kind of changed my life a little bit. And so much happened at that time. Unfortunately, my dad died. I just found myself in France for a year. So I bummed around in France. I stayed with my best friend's parents. And I came home, and my mum said, yeah, you can definitely come home, but you need to find a job. My mum was a manager in the NHS. And then I literally went, within 1 week, I went from going to talk to the chief ambulance officer of what was the then Clwyd ambulance service. And within a week, I'd actually found myself in the ambulance service. No clue. I had no idea where I was going to be, no idea that I was going to be in the emergency services, and most definitely would never have planned it because I'm not a particularly conforming person. And to go into the emergency services, it's pretty disciplined. Ironically, it was really good for me. It taught me to be disciplined. It taught me to grow up. And initially, for about 10 years, I had a really, really good time. But I've always worked in the events industry. So my very first event as a volunteer was in 1981, the World Canoe Championships in Bate in North Wales. I've still got the pass, and I'm still proud of that because that means I'm getting close to 40 years of events. And I've always had these multiple passions, and that was the first thing I remember volunteering. And my dad was a volunteer. My dad was on the community council, so that's a strong theme throughout my life, is to volunteer and give back. And that I'll keep coming back to this as we talk this evening. I think it's really important. However, I think probably maybe 10 years in, I'd done my paramedic training. I was enjoying the additional challenge. Spent some time on the air ambulance. I mean, that was amazing. But again, I found the air ambulance in those days, because I worked in North Wales, I would quite often find that the work had been done before we arrived, and literally I was flying taxi. In those days we were no better skilled than the people in the ground ambulance, and in fact that's still the case these days. So I started to get itchy feet. Very lucky that my managers always tolerated me. They put me on various training courses, and I spent a fair amount of time teaching, which ignited another passion. And then I'm really, really happy to share this with people. My behavior started to change. I didn't recognize it. My wife most certainly did, my friends, but I kind of denied this for a long time. And I muddled on for about another 4 years until eventually I said, you know what, guys, yeah, I've got PTSD. I need to get myself sorted. I accepted help, and that was the number one step. Just say, yeah, I've got a problem. I need some help. And from that point on, things in my life really started to accelerate. I know it sounds kind of strange, but I did some crazy things to get my head together. I did some very, very long distance cycle rides, cycle through the States, cycle a big part of the Silk Route unaided. And I came back from that feeling a completely different man. So I spent some time, I thought, reevaluated what was I missing in my life. I thought, yeah, do you know what? I'm probably missing a degree. So I just decided to take myself off to university. I'd been doing some work at that time on BBC Top Gear. I'll come back to that in a little while and explain how that happened, because I know that sounds like a tall tale. And initially I went to do a NEBOSH course, but I discovered quite quickly that as an adult Welsh person, I was entitled to an education grant. So it wouldn't cover me for the NEBOSH, but it would cover me for a BSc in occupational health and safety. So into one of our local universities in North Wales, absolutely loved the course, had an absolutely brilliant tutor who was inspirational. I knew at that point that I was going to move on. So getting to the point, I graduated, I left the ambulance service, didn't really know where I was going, and incredibly, I think I was out of work for, genuinely hand on heart, I think 4 days, because I found that I had a unique skill set. I didn't know an awful lot about health and safety, although I'd become grad IASH, or by getting my bachelor's degree, but I was able to offer health and safety advice, and I was still a paramedic. So I became kind of a Scottish friend of mine refers to people like myself in those days as a rug, and I never understood what this rug thing was about. It turns out he meant really useful guy, and I was proud to be called a really useful guy. A chap called Eddie Campbell, who was just a brilliant rigger, and he's now moved on a long way from being a rigger. But so I aspired to be one of Eddie's rugs. I started my own business. I also worked for a company called Motorsport Vision, and so for a period of about another 10 years, I ran my own business. I also jobbed into various different health and safety roles. And over that 10 years, I also met a really, really incredible guy, a solicitor who only worked in the events industry. Okay. He kept popping up on Top Gear, and he said, "Yeah, okay, that bit of paper you've got doesn't mean anything. You've got absolutely no experience." So he made it his mission to get me some experience. I carried on studying. I plodded through a master's, which I never finished because just never had the time. But I did a postgraduate diploma in Derby Uni in event safety management. That was another door opener, because I started to meet really interesting people in the events industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still running my business. I'm still gaining experience in health and safety. And I started to make a little bit of a, not a reputation, but I started to become that really useful guy that could do 2 or 3 jobs. And it was brilliant. I worked on the World Rally Championship. I worked for Red Bull. I worked for Monster Energy. Worked for the Ford World Rally team. And this was all because I had both of these skills. But I knew that this had a finite life, because I wanted to be good at health and safety, and I was aspiring to be, a good health and safety practitioner, and to try and keep both of those skill sets up at the same time, it just wasn't possible. So, 2011, I was offered a full-time post with Capita, working for a pretty well-known guy called Richard Lim. Richard was one of my mentors and my inspirations, and I thought it was an honor to go and work with him. And do you know what? For 5 years, it worked out really well. The jobs I've done, I mean, I've listed them because I can't remember everything I did. But I mean, you look back on your life and you think, if you're going to tell somebody that what you've done, I think half of the time people will think it's a tall tale. I've done 2 Olympic Games. I've done a Winter Games. I've worked at a distance on a Commonwealth Games. I've done I've actually also worked on the Arab Games. I've forgotten that one. And the list of other things I've done, just goes on. But that came about through Capita. And I know Capita these days don't have a good reputation. But I was working for a very small part of an organization, being run by a really, really, dynamic guy. And I met some good people there as well, people that I still work with now, and people that I would still always lean into for advice. So they were good years. But one of the things I recognized is people would say, yeah, you think you've got 10 years experience, but you've only ever worked in the events industry. What do you really know? And fair point. I didn't really know much. So I kind of reached out a little bit, and I got a phone call from a company. I had no idea what they did. They were called MHI Vestas. Mm-hmm. So I went for an interview, and I realized actually that it was Mitsubishi and it was offshore turbines. So I jumped in there for a little while. Bit of an unusual role for me, this one. I did do some work offshore, very, very little. But the main emphasis was for me to work with the sales team, and effectively go in with the sales team and answer questions around installation and servicing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was interesting. But again, I got itchy feet. If you've been in the events industry, you've done rock and roll tours, and you've met incredible people. Although you work crazy hours, and I'm going to be really straight with you here, Blair, and I did get into a little bit of trouble with IOSH about 4 years ago. They interviewed me in the old magazine, and I was honest. If you work in the events industry, I can't prescribe to work within the working time directive. I'll come back to this again a little bit later on. Is it appropriate? Probably not. But there's a lot of people pay to come to concerts or pay to come to live events, and ultimately, we make some sacrifices. We're never ever we don't make these decisions lightly, but it's a tough gig, but I thrive on it. I thrive on the fact that I genuinely believe that good health and safety is incorporated early into live events. To become part of the creative process, not a bolt-on afterwards, which so many people just don't recognise. And that's been one of my mantras: get me in early, get me in as part of the early creative process. Get me in from day one. Let me have an input into the storyboard, and that's worked. And I still use it where I am now, because you guys, you see Formula E as a street racing. There's so much more goes on with Formula E than I think most people will realise. And kind of moving on to there was I had a short period where I've always fallen back on teaching as well. It's kind of been a safe place for me. I did some teaching, very, very basic stuff at the University of Chester through a friend and colleague. But I got a phone call, absolutely out of nowhere, could I jump on a plane and fly to Mexico? And it was from one of the directors of Formula E. I had done some work for them previously, but not a huge amount. In fact, what I'd done is get roads closed in different countries to allow them to go demonstrate the cars. But I flew over to Mexico. They wanted an audit. They'd had 3 serious accidents involving the public in the 3 previous races, and they were consecutive, and they were really worried. I did my audit, delivered the audit, and I arrived in Formula E by the most bizarre circumstances. I was actually leaving, and the then CEO, who calls me Doc, you can probably tell why he calls me Doc. He actually said, Doc, where are you going? I said, I'm going home. He went, no. He said, you leave Formula E when I tell you to leave Formula E. And that's kind of where I am now. It was an amazing way to join the company, but it's not been plain sailing. It's been a huge challenge, and we'll probably revisit this a little bit later on. But that's where I started. That's where I am now, and hopefully, I'll be here for a little while longer.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rick. Just to touch on a couple of points, the bit that you mentioned about your PTSD, that's so brave to be able to speak up about that, and I think you'll help a lot of people, especially someone in your position that's able to speak out and say, look, I didn't feel okay, I spoke up about it, I got help, and after I got help, my life accelerated beyond all belief. So that's excellent. Thank you very much for mentioning that.
And I'm really happy to do this. That there's a lot of people out there who are prepared to give up their time. One thing I will do is that I will talk anybody through my story, through what happened, through the journey, through the illness. But I'm not going to counsel anybody. I'm not going to offer advice on what they should do. I can only tell my story, and hopefully people can glean something from that that might help them, make that initial step. That for me is the key. And there's this presumption that's just males that won't admit. It's not the case. Females are just as likely to hide from this condition or any mental health conditions. Males and females, I find, we just presume that blokes, because blokes are tougher and harder, and we kind of assume, or we kind of correlate, PTSD with the military and the emergency services. Again, that's not necessarily true either. So anybody out there that wants to have a chat with me, you can reach out to me through LinkedIn, through IOSH. I am more than happy to tell you my story, and I'll tell you the way that I found to get through it. It's typical of me. It's not traditional. What I did was off the wall, and my physicians really didn't like the idea. But again, if you want to talk to me, please, I'm more than happy to share this with you.
Okay, much appreciated, Rick. You also mentioned that you were on Top Gear. Can we explore that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. See the colour of the hair?
I can only imagine, and I'm really looking forward to hearing this bit.
Yeah, it was again the lawyer that I mentioned that works, just in works. He's a safety guy in the events industry. He's a really interesting guy. He's actually become one of my absolute best friends in life. But he just said, if you prepare to use both of your skills, we'll get you onto the show. And predominantly what I did was a lot of the live shows, and I did a lot of the live tours. So they kind of stopped the live show, I think, in 2012, 2013, but I did 11 years on that world tour immediately after the series. And there were some fascinating times. There were some, horrifying times. But this idea that this irreverent approach, it actually wasn't the case. It was Hat-Trick Productions, a guy called Andy Willman, although it looked as if it was kind of off the wall, it really wasn't. Everything was scripted, and the safety was really quite strong, because ultimately the product was being sold to the BBC, and therefore the production company had to prescribe to the BBC standards. So there was still some hairy stuff, but the other thing I used to do, because from a distance, if Clarkson was too bored to actually do a photo shoot and it was a long shot, you know what I'm going to say? Both of us got crazy hair. So one of the funniest things that ever happened, we were doing the live show in Earls Court, and I got to Earls Court and I looked up at the poster and I thought, yeah, that's not Clarkson, that's me driving that car. So this massive photograph of me driving a GT40, and in fairness, the guys actually got that poster for me. So it was a great memento. Equally, it was good fun, but it wasn't easy. Again, crazy hours, lots of traveling, and yeah, on that show, it wasn't necessarily about health and safety per se. It was a broader picture. It was about welfare. It was about some really basic stuff, like making sure that people were properly fed and people had were actually getting hydrated. Some of the places we worked, it just wasn't easy to put that in place. So while there was the typical issues around you'd be in a different country and you'd look up and think, is that rigger really doing that, or is that lighting technician really hanging off that hanging by just one hand while trying to fix that light in place? That kind of stuff did happen, but that stuff is manageable with experience. What I found difficult was actually trying to influence a change in the way that the staff were looked after, and that kind of put me at odds with not so much with the presenters, but definitely put me at odds with the production company. But I lasted for 11 years, so obviously I wasn't that painful during those 11 years.
You must have been doing something right. Were you on
they couldn't find anybody else.
Were you on the famous Argentina trip that they were kicked out of the country?
No, I wasn't. The one that horrifies me is they're trying to create their own amphicars to go across the English Channel. That was an interesting one. But I think I do tell people that it was almost a life sentence. It was 11 years, but it wasn't full time, because it's film and TV. You job in and you job out, but that opened doors. One of our regular drivers was an Indian driver, really good driver, typical of his ilk, did really well in junior formulas, and then hit the glass ceiling. Just didn't have the money to get to that next level, and he became a kind of a brand ambassador for Honda, and said, well, actually, we're going to do some filming in the UK. Do you want to come and get involved in that? So yeah, of course, anything for I was going to say anything for experience, but also there's a bottom line. You still need to live. You need a salary. You need to get some money in. And on the back of that, would you believe, I actually did 3 Bollywood movies. Which, how does a kid from North Wales end up doing Bollywood movies? And that was again another fantastic experience. But what I have found is that you do something, you meet somebody, and it leads you on to something else. Yeah, and that's the way I've gone through, and I don't think I've ever turned anything down, even if it's I certainly haven't turned anything down if it involves travel, because travel, hand on heart, travel's good fun. You meet interesting people, and you make yourself more useful because you learn you learn what's required of you in multiple different countries. It's great that you can fall back on Barber, but it's actually really useful if you're in a meeting and somebody challenges you in Berlin or in Paris, that you actually have half an idea of what the regulation they're referring to. I made it my mission to understand the Code de Travail very, very, very early in my career, working back into between UK and Paris. I'll come to that in a while as well. That's actually been really useful. I struggled in France for a little while, and then I'm just going to knuckle down, learn the relevant parts of the code, and then add to my skill set, and still try to be that really useful guy that this guy that Eddie Campbell saw all those years before. So I've been a bit of I think it's fair to say I've been a nomad.
Travelled around quite a lot, yeah. Can you tell us a bit about Formula E then, Rick? Because I'm absolutely fascinated. First of all, big fan, love the cars, love the technology that's being rolled out, and all of the stuff that's trialled that goes with Formula E, and all of the kind of development stuff that's being done. Tell us a little bit more about managing health and safety in Formula E and what it consists of.
Well, let's take a step back. So when I joined Formula E, I like cars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaning towards an electric car because I get to drive some really interesting electric cars, you know, through work. But I still live in a relatively rural area, and I don't want to put myself in that issue where I've got this range issue because of the battery capacity. But when I joined Formula E, I'll be really straight with you, and I know that, you know, I will send the link on to my colleagues in Formula E. I wasn't sure, you know, in those early days. I knew that the people behind Formula E, with their history in motorsport, I knew that it was, you know, the right people were there. I just didn't see it. And what I didn't understand is it's not just about the racing. It's a much bigger picture. That the racing is just one part of it. It's about the integration of the brand on so many different levels. The other thing, the demographic of Formula E is totally different to other championships. Our demographic, you know, it's kind of peaking out, you know, probably mid-30s is, you know, anybody sub 35, maybe even younger. That's where we're targeting. We've integrated really well into esports, but we did that before everybody else. We were the first to do it. So there's a much bigger picture around what Formula E are looking to do. And, you know, there's a famous Henry Ford quote, you know, you race on a Sunday, you sell on a Monday. We have that is part of our ethos, because if you look at our teams, we have 12 teams. 9 of those teams are manufacturers, and I suspect in the next, you know, 2 or 3 seasons, we may find that there are more manufacturers joining us. You know, it is, you know, a fact that some Formula One teams are currently struggling. If you could, you know, I won't go into the difference in costs, but the difference in costs between Formula E and Formula One is exponential. What we're not presuming to deliver, you know, anything like that product at the moment, but, you know, we're still growing. So what does Formula E feel like to me? Well, you guys see the shiny bit. You see the shiny bit for 45 minutes an hour on any given Saturday, 12 or 14 times a year. When I ever talk about specifically health and safety in Formula E, the thing that surprises people the most is that I consider us to be a construction company. We're the only championship that builds our own tracks, and it's not just a matter of dropping a few concrete blocks and then putting some debris fence on top. If you think about the infrastructure that goes with it, you know, we need to install our own effectively our own grid. The amount of power that our cars draw during charging is really surprising. We're currently getting up to somewhere around 1.7 megawatts of power required. That has to be planned and installed. The technology that's required. All of this comes either in containers or comes in our aircraft, and you know, the logistics behind all that. I have some responsibility around logistics. Our logistics centers in Donington. I work very closely with the guys around, particularly around battery safety. We actually fly the batteries in a very clever UN approved container, and yeah, that's a big piece of work as well. But if you think about logistics, the planning, actually building the tracks, taking the tracks down, bringing in all of the human elements that you need to deliver that, then bringing in the shiny bit that you guys see on TV, bringing in the race cars and the drivers, it's just an absolutely massive operation. And my colleagues in Formula One, you know, I don't care, I'm going to say this, they do definitely have an easier life because they rock up the week before the race. They've got pre-built everything. Yes, they have problems, and yes, their logistics are, you know, they're huge, but they don't have to build the track, and that's what makes us different. And I think that's good for us. What we just did in Berlin, we delivered 6 races on 3 different tracks in 9 days. Now, no one else can do that. To keep people interested, we can change the track because it is literally a matter of, you know, moving the block. It's not as simple as it sounds, but we've done it now nearly 70 times over the past 6 seasons. We're getting pretty good at it, and it adds to the excitement. And it's, you know, for me, there are days where I'm thinking, why am I doing this to myself? I'm nearly 60. There has to be something I could do that's easier than this, but it's keeping me young. I'm working with incredibly talented young people. I'm learning from them. Hopefully they glean something from, this old grey-haired old dog from North Wales who's been around for a little while. And yeah, I don't see me, hopefully, unless Formula E changes their mind, I don't see me going anywhere else for the foreseeable. Yeah, I'm enjoying the challenge. There's just I could talk to you about Formula E itself, but I think the key thing that interests people is probably the charging, the changes in the technology in charging and the batteries. When I joined Formula E, we needed 2 cars to do a 45-minute race. In less than 4 years, we've gone from the drivers needing to do a swap of the cars halfway through the race. Now we could genuinely run a race at full power, 1 battery for an hour. And that's changing. In fact, the battery capacity is now, the technology is so good that from our next series of cars, which will appear in 2 years' time, we'll be able to introduce pit stops. So we will send the cars out with not enough capacity in the battery to run for the full race, and that will mean they will need to come in and rapid charge. So in between 20 and 30 seconds, they'll be able to top their batteries up, and they will be able to go out and complete the race. But the technology in the car as well, the regeneration, how the guys drive the cars, these are not easy cars to drive. And equally, I know they don't make a lot of noise, but if you can just focus on the racing, how many times they overtake in a lap, and compare the overtaking in Formula One, it's more like the racing you'd find at Formula Ford level. Lots of excitement, there's a little bit of wheel banging, which does cause us some headaches. We do get more red flags than probably some series. But the cars are just hard to drive. We have Formula One drivers come and they struggle. They just can't get their heads around how these cars work. And we find that the guys that come from GT racing, from endurance racing, because there's a similar technology in those cars, although it's a hybrid technology, they find it easy to drive the cars. But bear in mind that if you're doing 185 miles an hour and you hit a concrete wall,
going to hurt.
It certainly is going to hurt. So these are not slow cars at all. Their acceleration is obscene, but they don't corner. Yeah, they don't corner like a Formula One car. They don't, they don't perform like a Formula One car. But we're not trying to make them do that. We're trying to make it interesting, as part of a bigger package and a bigger picture. Something else I guess people don't commonly know is that we're Formula One and Formula E are part of the Liberty Media Group. So ultimately, very, very, very top end. We are actually managed by that same group. And we also lean into other partners in the group, Ticketmaster and Live Nation. And we deliver a lot of entertainment around our events. We have something called an e-village, which is, there is so much to do at one of our races. In fact, if our team get it absolutely correct, some people will miss the race because the stuff we've got happening in the e-village is so interesting that people get distracted. It's like a huge, it's kind of a motor show, but it's better. That's all. That's the best way to put it. But the other thing that keeps me interested in Formula E is obviously the technology. But we've got some great people. I think I want to mention this a little bit later on, but we've obviously had to deliver the last races in Berlin in very unique circumstances. But to get around these COVID protocols, we didn't need to go to a third party. We've got staff within our technology team who are more than capable of writing our own programs for us. I'll come back to that because I'm kind of proud of that. But I guess you're going to ask me at some point what's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and it's going to have something to do with Formula E, I promise you.
We'll come to that in good time, Rick. We'll come to that in good time. So if you just continue telling us a little bit more about some of the interesting aspects that you've had across your health and safety career, because I know we've only scratched the surface at the moment and we want to delve a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think, some of my I don't want to say some of my successes because my biggest success is because that kind of smacks of arrogance, but I don't mean it that way. But sometimes I find that the most difficult challenges, you look for unique solutions, and that's one of the things that I've always been open to, because through my career there's never been an option to stop. If you work in the events industry, ultimately somewhere somebody wants to either push a button, so an uplink to a satellite goes live, so that your event is televised, or an audience is waiting to see the show. So I've always looked for, I would say unique approaches, but I've always looked for solutions rather than stop. I've always taken a pause, reevaluated, and looked for a solution, and that's what's driven me through my career. So I have had some real difficult times. I found the Winter Olympics in Sochi really, really difficult. I made it difficult for myself because I applied for the wrong visa. I had a single entry, single exit visa. That wouldn't have been too bad, but my contract was for a year. So I was in Sochi for a year, and that was hard work. But what I struggled with in Sochi was, I guess quite a few people have seen the stories about local people being forcibly evicted so that they could build, and some of that was true. I found that difficult. I saw some of it because I was there early, but it was just a blatant disregard for life. There was no value. I was working on the opening and closing ceremonies in Sochi, and because we'd got a well-developed European health system operating in our little bubble, construction workers were bringing their colleagues to us, and we had 4 pretty horrendous fatalities while I was there, and it was it was just so futile. There was nowhere to send these people. They weren't insured. And we did our very best to try and influence our local colleagues, but ultimately, if the culture doesn't exist, you can't in a short period of time, less than 12 months. You're not going to change a culture in that time. What we did manage to do is bring in some key people from the local production agencies to work with us, and those people have gone on to be I would say one of them has become world leading in health and safety in the events industry. And when I first met him, who would ever have believed that there would be Russians that would be that influential in the events industry? Because at that time, and we're not talking long ago, it was 6 years ago, they really didn't have any culture at all of health and safety. So I found that difficult, not as a technical challenge to to me as a health and safety practitioner. What I found that challenging was because they, something that we all hold sacrosanct in Russia, perhaps wasn't as important as it was to me and my colleagues. Losing a life to us is truly shocking. But over there at the time, it just was accepted. I found that really hard, and I've had other challenges. Generally, my challenges have been around trying to get something built, trying to get something delivered in the safest way as possible with appropriate mitigations without taking, undue risk in very, very, very short timescales. And that doesn't always have to be in a different country. I've always found Royal Windsor Horse Show. They do so much in Royal Windsor, and there's multiple activity happening, in close proximity. Right the way through the whole show, and that is difficult just to keep your head around. You really have to be deeply embedded in the schedule to understand how much is happening, where it's happening, and where the key risks are that day. And there was a person was run over in Royal Windsor. I think it was 2011, and that brought together a group of people who focused on traffic management and crowd management, which hadn't existed before. And it's very, very sad that it took a serious accident for that change to be made. But they did make the change. They stepped up. They accepted that they needed to make change, and it's vastly improved. Sadly, I think we see this right the way through most industries, that the companies don't react until they've had a serious incident, and then they do 2 things. They they tend to take knee-jerk reactions, and then they become very introspective, and quite often don't see the bigger picture. They just default straight to a root cause analysis, and don't necessarily think their way through the process. They quite often, and we've all have seen this, people will have decided what the causation for the accident was probably before they've taken their first witness statement. So again, we've all been through it. I have my own approach. It's a little bit of what I picked up when I worked offshore, and it's what I picked up through working with people who are significantly cleverer and brighter than me, and I've lent into them for their experience. We all find our own way, and I'm happy to admit that I came to this industry late. It's been a really fun approaching. It has been 20 years now, but there are people out there who have got a lot more experience than me.
Yeah. And do you think your life in the ambulance service before going into health and safety stood you in good stead for the career that you were going through?
Yeah, I'm smiling because there's still people who still think I'm a paramedic, which I find, it's 9 years ago. I haven't forgotten what I did, and I'm really careful now. I definitely don't give advice. I'm still I've still got a first aid certificate, but that doesn't qualify me as a paramedic, for sure. Absolutely not. I know one end of a bandage from the other now, and I'm quite happy at that level. What it has done is we've just written our own protocols for managing COVID, which we thought would be for one race. Now, sadly, it looks like we'll be using these protocols for a lot longer than just the one race in Berlin. But having been a paramedic for so many years, and while I pretend that I'm not interested, I do read the magazines and keep in touch with what's going on. That gave me an additional skill, which I was able to offer to my colleagues, and they lent into me. And yeah, we actually have produced. I'm actually going to say this because I'm actually really proud of the colleagues that I work with to deliver this. We've actually created a world leading, return to racing COVID protocol. We haven't reinvented the wheel. We've taken advice from the Bundesliga. We definitely didn't follow what they did in Formula One. That we knew that wasn't going to work for us, because we're a very different series and we deliver our races very differently. But we did some. We recognized early that we couldn't take our normal ecosystem of 4,500 people around the world. I should have said that earlier, shouldn't I? Our ecosystem around a build is 4,500, which probably makes us the biggest building or construction project in any city that we go to while we're there. So we reduced our traveling circus to 1,000 people. We increased our build schedules by 100%. And we just asked our colleagues to be tolerant and live inside a hygiene bubble for 5 weeks. That meant going to your hotel, staying pretty much in your room, traveling to the track, staying in designated zones, being PCR tested every 5 days, being tolerant of all of these tests, and with the end game of delivering the race. Now, one really for me, this was I don't want to say I'm proud of this, but I'm actually really pleased. The FIA noticed what we've done, and the FIA actually have adopted our protocol. So moving forward, other race championships will be able to use the work that we did. And there was an awful lot of late nights. It took us 3 months to develop the protocol. We needed the protocol to be passed, in Berlin. Initially, it was by the Berlin Senate. And then we had to get buy-in from the two local authorities, the two local borough councils, who also approved the work that we've done. So it was a huge amount of work. We met some amazing people. We've actually now looking at how we can take this protocol onto our next race in Santiago in, seems like ages, but it's only 4 months away at the start of our next season. Because I'm afraid the reality of COVID is that we're not going to be seeing the spectators at our races anytime soon. And if we are going to take 1,000 people around the world to deliver these races, we have to do it in a way that, that as far as reasonably practicable, maintains their safety.
Okay. So you've mentioned quite a couple of places that you've been with the racing, Rick. One that stuck out to me was New York. How was that?
Yeah. I love New York. So New York has been a city that I've spent a lot of time in. And because of that, I thought I knew my way around events in New York. No, I didn't. Learned that lesson the hard way. And then there was two big lessons I've learned in New York over the past 4 years. The absolute authority of the fire department and the absolute authority of the city. The fire department came in to inspect our first race, and they insisted on putting, they wanted to bring all their toys to play. And having been in the emergency services, I kind of thought, oh, this is massively overkill. And I might actually have said that to one or two of the senior fire officers, that do you really need all of these boats? Because our cars don't tend to do what they did in the old movies, that they fly out of the circuit and the drivers drown. And then I thought it was a really, really wicked wheeze that one day, what we found that each watch as they changed over would want to come and have a look at what we're doing. And I'm up for that. I'm show anybody around the site, show anybody the cars, because that's what they're interested in. They want to know about the cars, they want to know about the batteries, they want to know about the fire risk associated with the battery, and they want to know about charging. But we had a what we would call a station officer, came swaggering onto the site with his uniform, his hat on, and his, he did look the full John Wayne. And he asked, like, where's the refueling rig at? So I actually had a battery and a piece of flex. I had a plug and a piece of flex. Yeah, we don't use fuel. And everybody else found it very funny. He eventually found it funny. Let's say he didn't find it funny at the time. So yeah, me choosing to be as he called me later, a wise ass, could have backfired. But what that actually did, because we both laughed at each other, I've now built a really strong relationship with the fire department, and I've learned so much. I mean, a lot of the fire code, particularly in Manhattan, it's still handwritten. I mean, they trace the code right back to the early days when the fire department was predominantly run by the Irish, and very, very proud Irish firefighters. And it's just fascinating to see that book that goes back 150 years. And it's actually a fantastic history of fire safety in New York. And I every time I see it, I say, guys, you should publish this. There's people around the world that would love to see this. And it's like, nah, who wants to know about what we do? But one of the things that I'd learned very quickly is that fire safety and not even the legislation, because they don't necessarily have legislation like we do. They have the fire safety requirements change almost from a borough to borough, at a borough to borough level, and they just don't get that they're doing something quite unique. But yeah, I've built a good relationship, and I'm now really proud of that relationship. And I've even sent them products because they have an amazing testing lab in Brooklyn. We wanted to try out a new medium for firefighting called Lithex, and I wasn't sure, so I bought a few cans and I sent it to the guys in Brooklyn, and the report I got back was world class, and we decided to use it. It has some benefits. Unfortunately, it's not really beneficial until until the battery has gone into full thermal runaway, which is a point where you wouldn't really want to be anywhere near the battery anyway. But it just shows how, from initially quite a fractious relationship, you can be introduced to this like esoteric volume of, almost like the dark arts of fire safety in New York. And I'm actually really proud that they've actually allowed me into that, not in a sanctum, but they actually do speak to me, which is apparently they don't generally do that. And I'm proud of that. And I also give them tickets, so they're not daft.
So what's been the most challenging race so far then, Rick? Apart from the one that we're going to talk about, which was Germany, which was just off the chart, running 6 races in such a close proximity of time and on such different tracks. Other than that one, we'll go into that in a little minute, but what's been your most challenging one, most challenging country to operate in?
So all new races are difficult. And I can explain why they're difficult. And some of the reasons they're difficult around health and safety is that until recently, the whole of the health and safety function in Formula E was a one-man band. It still effectively is a one-man band. It's just that now I've got 16 really talented people around the world who work with us, albeit on an ad hoc basis. But they work with us at several races a year. So I now have a good team to lean into. But I think if I had to pick one race, it's probably Sanya, which is an island off the coast of China, and it's so difficult. They just didn't have the equipment we needed. They certainly didn't have a safety culture, and the island is developing as a kind of a 6-star holiday resort.
Yeah.
And I think in probably 10 years' time, it might be a place that we might be going to on holiday.
Yeah.
But currently, it's a place that Chinese and Russians go to. It's a beautiful place. I stayed in one of the nicest hotels I've ever stayed in my life. I walked in the room and went, "Really? Is this for me?" Wow. It was really good.
Called the Hawaii of China, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And there's some great hotels. And I think in a little while it will be great. However, trying to put on an international motorsport race on what effectively is a shut down dual carriageway, which means that we disenfranchised that population for 2 weeks, and just not having this, you can't get the fencing that you need. You can't get, if you forget something, you didn't put it on the aircraft or you didn't put it on the boat, you're not going to get it, because the nearest place you probably would find it would probably be Shanghai or even Hong Kong. So that was difficult from a logistical point of view. People were great. And again, as with, I find this with my Chinese colleagues, and when I've worked in China, I've been very lucky to work in Shanghai quite a while, quite a few times over the past 20 years. Chinese people learn very, very quickly, and not only do they learn, they then actually develop and improve. So that's one of the things that fascinates me about China. Sadly, Sanya, good people, nice place, no infrastructure. So that was difficult for that reason. But we also had a very difficult race in Santiago, Chile, in season 4.
Yeah.
And that was a Formula E cock-up. We designed our track on 2 sides of a river, which and both sides of the river, the main roads, ran into the center of the city. They bisected a student area, and we then closed the 2 bridges that allowed people to get in and out of the 2 halves of the city. So imagine if you're a student and you want to cross to a different campus while we were in the city, you couldn't do it. And it was the first time that we'd ever experienced any actual hostility. It was called a riot. It absolutely wasn't a riot. It was probably 20 or 30 very, very hacked off people who made it very clear to us by throwing bricks and bottles. So it's not all easy. You want to build a circuit in the middle of the city to get those amazing backdrops, and so that your cars are on show to the people. Because our tickets are cheap, we're not charging Formula 1 prices. We want people to come to our races, but unless you understand the concept, and if you shut someone's city down, that's probably it's likely to lead to a few issues. And yeah, we had those issues for sure. But we now go to a different place in Santiago, and invariably, I promise you, if I could wheel in 20 or 30 of my colleagues from Formula E, I guarantee you that nearly all of them would say that their favorite race is now Santiago.
Just because
I love it. yeah, and I love the weirdness of Santiago, because you're just on that point where, you know, back 80, no, 100 years ago, thousands of Welsh farmers and their families moved to South America, and it's very, very weird to be able to speak Welsh in South America to somebody who knows your language but speaks it with a Spanish accent, which is totally bizarre. So I love the culture, I love the people, and it's weird. You know, I'd never been to that far south in South America before. I didn't realize how Europeanized it was. You know, then it's very European, very, very influenced by Spain, by Germany. Not so much British influence there, although, you know, the Chile as a nation was founded by an Irishman, Bernardo O'Higgins. So yeah, if I was going to go on vacation somewhere, and you said you have to go on vacation somewhere where Formula E goes, probably New York would be number one, but Santiago would be right up there as well.
Yeah. And what's been your favourite show that you've done, Rick? Because you've done multiple big rock shows, you've done the racing, you've done loads of different events. What's been the absolute standout one that you thought that was the best event I've ever done?
So, and they're actually some of the smaller ones. So, and the smaller events allow you access to, you know, to the talent, if you like. And I try very, very hard not to be starstruck, but because I've spent so much of my life around motorsport, and, you know, I've worked in motorsport a lot of my life, I'm not fazed by the famous drivers anymore. In Formula E, of course, you still get to see some of the old famous Formula One drivers. There's a story I can tell you about Emerson Fittipaldi, but it involves a lot of swearing, so I can't actually tell you that story. But let's just say,
Feel free to swear if you like, Rick.
yeah, remind me of that at the end when people are getting a bit bored of listening to me talk. But yeah, you know, I've done short parts of tours with Kiss, with AC/DC, you know, some of the world's biggest bands. But when I was with Capita, we had the contract for a small event space in the inside the old Battersea power station when it still was wrecked, and it was used for a lot of film sets. So I think we filmed one of the Batman movies in there. So I worked on that. One of the Fast and Furious, I think it was, I can't remember which one, Fast and Furious 364, whatever number they're on now. But there was a lot of really interesting weddings and gigs that would take place, and these were quite unique, because if you imagine inside the power station, which was gutted, you could light it amazingly. So I did two evenings there with Paul McCartney. We did an evening there with what remains of the Who, Adam Lambert, when he was just joining Queen. And it's just so nice to be able to sit in a space where, you know, there's only going to be maybe 100, 150 invited guests, and there's no pressure on the artist, so people just talk. And again, one of Rick's anecdotal tales, because I'd worked in the power station for, you know, so long, I actually had some keys, and one of my passions is architecture, particularly 1920s architecture, and the original control room. If you're looking at the power station, you know, from the river, to the right, which was the original part of the power station, that control room is full of Lalique glass. It's beautiful Art Deco. So I used to take people on, you know, Rick's guided tours of the power station, and I was asked to take this guy for a tour, and he seemed an interesting guy. You know, you know, in his 60s, beard. I didn't know who he was, and about half an hour into this tour, I kind of thought, yeah, you kind of seem familiar. And he was talking about growing up in Chelsea, and, you know, he actually told me that how houses on the other side of the river from the power station were heated by the power station by some of the water from the cooling water from the power station, which was then used to heat these municipal properties. So it kind of dawned on me that, oh yeah, you're that drummer from Queen, aren't you? Roger Taylor. I had no clue. And, you know, when I clicked, he realized that I'd realized, and he thought that was absolutely hilarious. And do you know what? If I'd ever if you look at who would ever have thought that, I would actually be talking to, members of Queen. But I would have always thought that he would be the one that I didn't want to talk to. And as it turned out, I mean, I was so wrong. What a nice guy. I got the stories about the dentistry, and that was kind of a bit of a story because yes, he qualified, but never practiced. And then later on, I got to see them play, which was cool. So again, it's not always about the biggest. Sometimes it's about, these kind of esoteric events where it's just a small invited audience. And again, because of my motorsport background, I've done some quite interesting weddings and some quite interesting engagements. I did Tamara Eccleston's engagement party when her father decided to give the groom to be a Bugatti Veyron, and we had to design a platform that would hold this Bugatti Veyron to allow it to be wheeled into the venue, which proved to be very challenging. Fortunately, there's some really clever guys from a company called Star Events who they came in, worked it out, did the math, built it in. It was like 12 hours. It was done. But yeah, so it's not all about being the biggest. Sometimes it's just about doing something that's interesting. I've got nice little stories about Duffy, because she's a local girl. I remember her working in our local French restaurant. One night she did an open mic in Chester, and she just got spotted. So yeah, I don't necessarily always want aspire to the biggest events. It's sometimes you can just do something small that's quite unique and have a really good time and do your job really well. And going back to the Paul McCartney thing, the 2 nights they did in Battersea, at the end of it, the crew asked, could I actually manage to get an extension on the power station closing? I said, well, I'll try, but it's going to be challenging. And they said, look, we need to get this stuff. It's going out on tour. So we need to get everything off this stage, everything packed up and gone. So I managed to do it. And as we were leaving, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. One of the guys came over and said, Rick, Paul wants you to have this. And it was a world tour AAA pass. And he said, look, anywhere in the world, this AAA pass works. And that probably, if you said, what's your best, which is what means more to you from your experiences in the events industry, that one pass means something, because I didn't do a lot, but I did something that anyone could do, but I did actually just make the effort to do it. And I was never a Beatles fan. I was kind of a Wings fan, but yeah, I've kind of grown into the Beatles ever since. It's funny how little things can change your life, and and I will come back to this, as we talk. It's not about the big things, Sometimes it's about doing something small that can have a big impact.
So that's excellent, Rick. Thanks for sharing that experience with us. It's really, really fascinating. See if we move on a little bit to talk about the recent race. I know this is going to be probably your biggest challenge in health and safety in your career. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, don't know where to start. Some good things happened before we actually committed to Berlin. I'd been not fighting, but I'd asked for. I recognised that I needed a specialist in construction safety. I muddle along. We've all got experience. Most of us have got experience in construction or manufacturing, but I needed somebody with more experience than me. And I was giving a talk for my local IOSH branch in Wrexham. And I gave that talk, and it's the talk I gave which I think a few people are surprised at, because I really struggled with my chartership, just because I'm in the events industry, just time, and I found it difficult to get through the IPD. Some of the submissions are really difficult unless you're in traditional industry. So I give a talk on, if you are in the events industry, or you're in an industry that doesn't necessarily conform to what was in those days quite a rigid process, and it's a bit irreverent, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and I've seen a few senior IOSH people groan, but people keep asking me to deliver this session, and I still keep delivering it. And at the end of this young lady approached me. She said, I've been working in the construction industry for 5 years. I've just finished my degree. How do I get into the events industry? I just couldn't believe this. No, one, she had the confidence to come and speak to me. Two, she had the skills I needed. And three, it seemed a bit too good to be true. So I didn't actually push this forward. What I did, I introduced her to one of my directors. He interviewed her with one of our event directors, and they said, yeah, we're going to get this girl in for London. She is absolutely brilliant. And then as I was leaving the room, one of the other directors said, well, if we're going to go through this, why don't we just keep her with us? So there's to start the story, I had an amazing result. I had a very, very talented young lady join my little team. That's supported by another guy called Drew, who again, I didn't look for. He kind of found me, and he's been absolutely awesome. He's just one of those people where you don't know that you're just so simpatico, if you like. And we are, we grate off each other occasionally, but we deliver what Formula E needs. So there's my little team. I stood back from managing health and safety at Berlin for two reasons. One, the amount of work we needed to do around PCR testing and the process, which I'll come to in a second. So I also thought this is the time for my team to spread their wings and see what it feels like to actually manage this whole process. Now, we always aspire to work within best practice within CDM. Not always easy, but for Berlin, we absolutely set out and we followed our own CDM process. The construction phase plan was superb. Not done by me, I hasten to add. It was done by this young lady, Alice. Germans, quite interestingly, although we presume that European countries will do what we do in the UK, they absolutely do not. We needed to explain what the construction phase plan was to our local colleagues. We also needed to explain what an event safety plan or an event safety concept was. And interestingly, their approach to risk assessments is very, very different to ours. They're non-numerical. They don't like assigning a numerical value to what they perceive or what could be perceived as a risk. They write everything. Like, it's fine, as long as you write it down, that's fine. But I found that process challenging because we needed to change our process to match theirs. So I let Drew and Alice spread their wings. They did an absolutely amazing job. And bear in mind that we're quite a young demographic as an organisation. Our chief engineer is 30 years old. And he's built every track for us. He literally joined us straight out of university, and he's grown with the championship. Yeah, he is a unique character. Just a slight sidebar here. He's also one of these. He's a polymath. If he picks up a musical instrument, he plays it brilliantly within a few months. He plays the piano, he plays the trumpet, he plays the saxophone. It's always good when you put a beer in him in a pub somewhere random, and there's a piano, because he's going to play the piano, wearing his high vis, and his safety shoes. So that's another story for another time. So I decided, if I wanted to I am supposed to have a broader view of the whole of the company, and because I just haven't had the staff to support me, I kind of have focused on delivering the events, and that has on occasion been to the detriment of the overall running of the business, because we've got a very plush office suite in Hammersmith in London. We also have our logistics centre in Donington, and there have been occasions where, just to do me never being in the UK, maybe I'd let some things there slip. So for me personally, Berlin was several big decisions. Let my team actually manage the race, step back, take an overview of the bigger picture. But I really needed to support one of my event directors, who is an incredibly talented lady, masses of motorsport experience, but neither of us knew about delivering a race in following COVID protocols, because there weren't any COVID protocols. And we were trying to persuade the Berlin Senate that we could actually bring 1,000 foreigners into Germany, and we could do that safely and not not put the local population at any additional risk. As it turned out, we were the most conforming, and when we were traveling back from the track to our hotel, it was really apparent that the local population in Berlin were not conforming to the German guidance. That proved challenging for me because I'm trying to push that we must deliver, we must work to the standard, while my colleagues are looking out the window of the bus and saying, but nobody else is doing it. So the COVID protocols in themselves, yeah, you know, getting everybody tested once every 5 days, 1,000 people, all in the same hotel, following the schedule, sounds complicated, but we've got clever, talented people, and ultimately it's a smart sheet. People turn up at the allotted time. Where it's became really clever is that we used the information from the PCR tests, and that was integrated into our accreditation system. And there was no way that we could just bolt that in, you know, because it didn't exist. And that accreditation system also allowed us access into specific areas. Now, it's very easy to put turnstiles up and put in a system that allows you to access the track to a turnstile. But when you actually want to introduce near field identification into that accreditation that only allows you into specific zones, that's where it gets challenging. And believe it or not, we actually, because of the talented people in the championship, we actually did that, and it worked really, really well. And it worked so well that that will now become our standard into next season. For me, it didn't just give me information on you know, whether people were compliant with the COVID protocols, but for probably the first time in, well, definitely the first time in 4 years, I was able to tell where anybody was on site at any time. I knew how many people were on site. I knew who they were by name. I could tell who was leaving and if they hadn't told us or not. Now, I know this sounds a little bit big brothery, but when you've got a hygiene officer from the Berlin city, you know, watching every move you make, it's really useful information. We've also going to integrate that now into our evacuation procedures because we've relied heavily in the past on individuals, line managers, to feed back the information to us about, you know, have all of your team left site? You know, are you at the appropriate assembly point? Well, now we've taken a step forward in technology, and we can actually, although, you know, I guess probably there are some questions to be answered, we actually know where everybody is on site, and you know, our colleagues all had to prescribe to a document to this policy and actually sign to agree to be effectively to be big brothered for a whole 5 weeks. So there were some very long days, very long nights. We unfortunately, the PCR tests didn't come back until midnight. So we would meet with the hygiene board from the local authority after midnight. So on top of a long day, you're having a Blue Jeans or a Zoom meeting at midnight to discuss who did or who didn't pass. And in fairness, because of the type of test we used, we used different tests to the test used in Formula One. Again, the technology around testing, I was unaware of this, and the number of cycles is highly relevant in the testing. Our testing, each test took 4 hours, and you know, we chose not to use these rapid testing because it didn't, quite often with the rapid testing, it doesn't give you a definitive answer. Ours was really, really simple. You were positive or you were negative. And we only threw up one grey result in the whole 5 weeks, which was, you know, we did entertain initially, perhaps being able to get them back to their home countries, but it wasn't acceptable. You know, we accepted the requirement. That's an interesting point, actually. So from the point they proved they were positive, they actually were out of my control, or mine and this young lady called Margot. At that point, they became they fell under the control of the local health authorities in Berlin, who again also were very professional. But yeah, so in all, it worked very well. If we look at the race itself, I mean, starting with the track builds, a normal track build, we're probably putting together the track in between 10 and 14 days, depending on the amount of infrastructure. We didn't need a lot of infrastructure this time. We didn't need to build grandstands. We didn't need to build any of the normal hospitality suites that we would build because we didn't have any guests. But everything else tripled in size because on the back of every garage, we needed a welfare space. And on the back of the welfare space, you needed a zone for storage and for catering. So while we didn't actually have any guests, we actually took up the same amount of real estate, which was, quite surprising when you saw it laid out in front of you. So that was a challenge. So there was a lot of structures built, and obviously temporary structures come with their own challenges. And yet the process of dismantling the track twice and rebuilding it, I mean, it was an epic undertaking, and we did it really well. I was really surprised. I wouldn't say it was easy. I was just really surprised at the commitment of the staff who, we'd all been in lockdown, up until we flew out to Berlin. So everybody was determined to deliver this because we needed to deliver those 6 races to ensure that this season became a championship officially. So yeah, people just knuckled down and we got through it. And when you consider that moving the track block is one thing, moving the power cables is another thing, but God bless the teams, the branding team, because there was so much rebranding to do because the camera angles change. So can you imagine that you move a camera, you then need to move the branding so that the appropriate sponsor is in the right camera shot. Mm-hmm. The amount of work was just ridiculous. And we didn't have the normal crew that we would do. So, again, I'm not going to, not going to be, I'm not going to lie to our colleagues out there. There were some very long hours worked, but the compensation was that it wasn't continual. There would be one long day and then a break. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that we were expecting people to work 18 hours day on day. They might work one 18-hour shift and then you get 2 days off. Still not necessarily appropriate, but I'm afraid that's the reality of working in my world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's not just all turning up to rock concerts and watching motor racing. There's a bit of graft that goes behind it as well.
There's a heck of a lot, and you think again, I know Berlin. You and I talked about Berlin because you called me when I was in Berlin, and we had a 5-minute conversation that took, what was it, an hour and 45 minutes or something like that, wasn't it? Yeah, it was 1 o'clock when we finished talking in the morning. So yeah, if we look at, let's give London as an example. So we didn't come out of the Battersea Park races in season 1 and season 2 smelling of roses. Some of the things that we did in those first 2 seasons, we showed that we were a young company. There was probably some naivety, and at that point, I think the whole company was certainly less than 50 people. Trying to deliver world-class motorsport, with 50 people, it was challenging. So in those days, I dropped in when and where they needed me. So going into London, should have been this year. The approach was completely different. Our track was in Excel, and obviously Excel in its own right has got well-established safety procedures and security procedures. And we decided as a team that we were going to do literally everything by the book. No, not shortcuts, but no, we cut and paste. We all do. Don't pretend that you don't. From one document to another, we rewrote everything for London, and I think the biggest plaudit that we've ever received, my little team. Newham Borough Council, their SAG, they reviewed our documentation submission, all 242 documents, and they came back and they said this is the best submission they've ever seen for any event. And bearing in mind that the Olympic Stadium was inside Newham Borough, so I was so proud of of what the work that Drew and Alice had done in preparation for that. So it was that's for me, that was that will be my memory of this season, not COVID. The fact that a little team with a bit of commitment and the right people with right experience and good qualifications. There's a little story around Alice as well. I think Alice may well be one of the youngest ever chartered members. Yeah, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the work they did. Because again, it was a race that I kind of led. I led the team, but it was very much Drew and Alice that delivered the race. Just shame we couldn't do it because of what's happened this year, sadly.
And you're very passionate, Rick, about giving people a chance and developing young people. What would be your advice or guidance to give to somebody starting out in health and safety today?
So, take a little pause. One of the things that within Formula E that you're expected to do, you're expected to fly the flag for the brand. And one of the directors I work really closely with is in his own right a very famous rally driver. I mean, he's in his 60s now, but back in his heyday, he was winning European championships regularly. He was a works driver for Lancia, and we've kind of developed a kind of a Rick and Manolo show. So Manolo, we will go to local universities, particularly we talk to engineering students, and Manolo will tell war stories about rallying. And then I will answer technical questions to the students around, they're all interested in the battery technology. They're all interested in the charging technology. I have to be honest, I know enough about that technology to be able to deliver that element of the race safely. But I also get a chance to talk to the students, and it doesn't matter whether you're an engineering student or whether you're doing a degree in occupational health and safety. I tell everybody to think broadly, because it's very easy. I also think sometimes universities influence students. I'm not saying they do that unduly, but I think quite often people get to university and they believe they need to follow a prescribed route. You absolutely don't. And one of the things I think is really valuable is that you should get experience across all parts of the industry. I've certainly been I don't consider myself to be an expert in anything, because absolutely clearly, if you're in the events industry, you become a jack of all trades. I probably know more about electrical safety, particularly around battery management, than some of my colleagues might. But I certainly know that colleagues in ABB, our main sponsor, there are guys in there that that would run rings around me. But I'm actually pragmatic enough to accept the fact that I know enough in my small world to be able to deliver that safely. And I don't try to be a god of anything. But I think it's really important that people don't get drawn down one particular route.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you shouldn't build a broad knowledge. Construction industry. If you get a good grounding in the construction industry, you can move on to anything. If you've worked offshore installing wind turbines in the middle of the Irish Sea in the winter, you've cut your teeth in some pretty serious, health and safety. There's no reason why you can't go on to do an Olympic Games, or you can't go on to do, to work in a major sporting championship. And I think that's the way we build strength in depth, and that's where we build, a broader knowledge. I'm not decrying anybody who spent their whole life in engineering or in manufacturing or in construction. People will be absolutely as passionate about those industries as I am about my industry. But you asked me what my view was, and my view was, if someone comes to talk to me about coming to work, in my team, I'm actually interested to see what they've done broadly. And that leads me into another thing that I'm very passionate about. The two people that make up the core of my team, they both found me and I found them because they, like me, are passionate about volunteering. Now, did I just fall into motorsport? Did I just, was I the only person that Formula E ever thought to speak to? Absolutely not. But because of my years involved in motorsport, it's over 40 years now. I was a name that was recognised by the FIA. I hold a senior international officials license in my own right. as a volunteer. You know, obviously you and I started to talk because of the volunteer work I do with IOSH. Yeah. And I genuinely believe, and I'm passionate about this, if you give your time, I mean, you just reap the rewards. I love mentoring. I meet so many interesting people, and I learn again. You know, I'm really pleased that you know, one of my mentees has now gone on to be head of health and safety at McLaren. And actually another one is at Mercedes. So and again, now I've got links into those two teams. I can, you know, we exchange ideas, and that's what it's about for me. It's about building up a network of building up my own network of really useful guys, of rugs, who I can ring and ask for advice. A guy that a local guy, you know, from Chester, who, you know, he asked me would I mentor him, and we just hit it off. He's got a broad range of knowledge, from agriculture through construction, through property management, and I have to say, he probably doesn't realize, but an awful lot of his work has ended up in my safety management files, because he's produced some really good work, you know. And again, you know, there's another bit of the story around you know, how I developed the Formula E health and safety management system. But if we just stick with what people should do, find your own way. I believe in volunteering. You don't necessarily need to give up hours of your time. You don't necessarily need to give up anything related to safety. Just give something back. It's worked for me. If I hadn't been involved in motorsport, the doors that have opened for me within the World Rally Championship, Formula E, and other championships I've worked on, and the racetracks I've worked at, that just wouldn't have happened. That's my story. Everybody needs to make their own story. They need to find their own way. And there is sometimes there's a, you know, you need to have a little bit of courage. I've made decisions that have left me without money for, you know, a few months, but you know, if you're good and you're passionate, I think people will find their way. I know the market currently is extremely difficult following COVID, and I certainly wouldn't advise anybody to, if they're in a full-time employment right now, to go and do anything else. I definitely would advise battening down the hatches and staying where you are. But it's been my way to dip in and out of different events, different specialties, and develop my own skill set. And again, I don't believe I'm anybody special. I know I've developed a unique set of skills which do make me useful in motorsport. But if I came out of motorsport, if I were to go back into, you know, hand on heart, you know, who wouldn't want to go and work in rock and roll permanently? You know, but I you know, again, there are skills that I'm lacking now. My crowd management skills, I get by. I can do the maths, I can do the numbers, but having it so that it's absolutely, you know, second nature to me, that's going to take me would take me a year to get that back. And by that time, I'm going to be the wrong side of 60. So I probably not a good idea. But yeah, volunteer, find your own way. And also don't forget, you know, that IOSH is full of, you know, interesting old people like me, you know, who are happy to give up their time to talk to you and offer you advice on what you might want to do. I'm never going to tell someone that you must do this, or this is the only way for you, or, you know, you want to get up to chartership, you must do this. That's just not my style. But what I've got is, you know, some years of knowledge. It's very obvious that my Welshness makes me predisposed to chatting. And again, that's something I like to do, you know. So again, if anyone out there wants to reach out to me through LinkedIn or through IOSH, please feel free to do that. I can't take any more mentees on currently. I said I would cap myself at 5, and I've now grown to 7. So I need to take a pause there. But yeah, so again, just find your own way, and you're not always going to get it right, for sure. I mean, I've made some absolutely epic mistakes, but you know, and we all hear you learn from your mistakes. You don't always learn from your mistakes, but what I've learned from my mistakes is that is to question myself, and something that's easier when you're older, but not so easy when when you're younger is actually show some contrition, be humble, because there's always a bigger dog, and sometimes it's just easier, even if you feel that you're, that you're in the right. Sometimes it's just think of the long game, and I've used that in my safety, as I've developed the safety system for Formula E. Again, this is a little bit anecdotal, and if any of my my Formula E colleagues hear this, they will groan out loud because they know what I'm just about to talk about. When I joined Formula E, there was a guy in the role at the time, but I'd met him and I knew that he'd come from Formula One, and he was actually a factory, kind of more of a on the utility side. He was more around management of the factory rather than health and safety. But what he'd done around the sporting side was very, very good. When I joined Formula E and I went to what I thought was the event management system, and I just found a lot of empty files. So it took me almost 2 years to develop our in-house system. And again, I took advice from colleagues, all you good people out there that I rang up and said I need and I got great support. I mean, I got support from the most unusual of places. I've got friends at the FA who helped me, even friends at Airbus who helped me. So there's all sorts of documents that helped me get this system started. At the time, the skill set that I really lacked was around environmental safety. And I realized that one of our sustainability managers was primarily an environmentalist who'd moved into sustainability. So God bless her. I dragged her into, creating our system. And kind of, I'm not going to labor this, but, I literally wrote everything. It was a miserable experience. In some respects, I learned a lot. I learned the spelling mistakes I make regularly, but our management system now runs to over 800 documents. And I did find a guy who was actually prepared to work through all of those documents and edit them, correct the spellings. And the interesting thing, to end this little part of the story, is that I'd resisted 45,001 because I didn't think we were ready. And one of my directors persuaded me to submit to a gap analysis. So we brought in an auditor that we use, a Portuguese lady, and I was really surprised that we were pretty much fully compliant with 45,001 on that initial from that initial audit, and that's changed my mind now. Initially, I thought because we hold 2012-1, which means there's a lot of work from my little team to make sure that we maintain that standard annually. I was a little bit reluctant to commit to 45,001 at the moment because we're still growing as a business. But it's actually inspired me to do two things. It's inspired me to take a step back, let my colleagues run the races. They're more than competent to do it. And I can then I can actually stop traveling as much, but I can actually look at the bigger picture around Formula E, the business. And also, I'm supposed to be preparing a corporate risk assessment of every race for the past 4 years. Never done it because I never had the time. But now my legal director can stop sending me, reminder emails, perhaps using expletives, and I can get onto that. And that's part of the growth. I've grown with the championship, and as much as I want to keep hold of my baby, part of that growth is to have the confidence to step back and allow my younger team to deliver that while I look at the bigger picture. And one of the things I'm really passionate about right at the moment is that because of the amount of time I spent traveling, I didn't get a chance to work with new cities early enough. So we've got a great team that goes out to you wouldn't believe this, but I think currently there's 32 cities that have invited us to race. Okay. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. Sadly, those cities do need to put up some money for us to be very interested. But we send a small team out who will then, look at the potential for the city. And obviously there's a big part of this will be part of our marketing strategy. But what I've never been able to do is actually get in early enough, particularly in countries where the health and safety management isn't as developed as perhaps we would like it to be, and spend time with those production companies, and be able to explain what we're looking for. And as part of that, I'm now going to focus on new races as we move into season 7, season 8, and hopefully beyond. But I've also spent a bit of time redefining a lot of the terminology in our management system, because I defaulted to, because I needed to create a management system relatively quickly. I'd spent a lot of time focusing on British regulations and guidance, and focusing on making sure I referenced across through the European regulations. And I thought I'd produced a really quite for me, I thought it was quite a competent piece of work. And I've realized you can't go to China and talk about British regulations. You certainly can't go to the US and try and force, British guidance certainly onto an American city, particularly not New York. So what we've done, haven't actually done an awful lot. We've just now taken away the references to, British and European guidance, and we've just renamed it as Formula E minimum standards. So it's exactly the same, but we've taken out those words that antagonize our colleagues in different countries. And so, I found it a lot easier now, and it's so simple, but it's such simple psychology. The standard we're expecting them to deliver to hasn't changed. And the key areas that we expect them to perform in, particularly around working a high plant, certainly around understanding what we mean by CDM and what we're asking from them, and particularly around the scheduling of builds, they get it, and they don't mind getting it, because we're not talking about British, we're not talking about British regulation, British guidance. So that's been for me, that's been a big learning, for me, it was a big learning. Simple psychology, but it's reaped so many benefits.
Excellent tips there as well, Rick. So I think we're at the stage now that we're going to sum up a little bit, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, we'll tag you up in the description when we put the description out for the video, and tag your LinkedIn. There'll be a couple of ads on LinkedIn as well. And thanks very much on behalf of the viewers. I think people are going to be really interested in this one. Keep up the great work. And on behalf of the people of Scotland, when's the first Formula E race in Scotland?
I think it will be the weekend after the first Formula E race in Wales.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much, Rick.
You're very welcome.
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.